Could the FIA's new technical directive help Red Bull? Lewis Hamilton blasts Max Verstappen for last week's crash. And could Carlos Sainz take next season off as another potential seat gets filled? Do consider subscribing to the channel. Let's get straight into the latest F1 news. Lewis Hamilton has reminded Max Verstappen to act like a world champion after the Red Bull driver's conduct was criticized at last weekend's Hungarian Grand Prix. Red Bull arrived in Budapest armed with their biggest upgrade of the F1 2024 season as the team aimed to retake control of the World Championship, yet were unable to restore the position as F1's dominant force. Verstappen could only manage third on the grid behind the McLarens of Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri before the reigning world champion endured a frustrating race. The Dutchman was heard criticizing the car and his team's strategy calls throughout the Grand Prix before colliding with Hamilton in the closing laps, ultimately coming home a distant fifth. Verstappen's annoyance continued after the race as he told his critics to fuck off while talking to the media. Hamilton, the most successful man in F1 history with a joint record 7 world championships and 104 pole positions and race wins to his name, has stressed the need for drivers to act like a world champion. Speaking to media, including ahead of this weekend's Belgian Grand Prix, he said, "You have to be a team leader, a team member. Maybe not such a team leader, but just always remember you're a teammate with lots of people, and you have to act like a world champion." Asked to explain what acting like a world champion entails, he laughed, "That's a good question, not like it was last weekend." Verstappen escaped a penalty for the incident with Hamilton, with the steward's ruling stating that the Mercedes driver could have done more to avoid the collision. Hamilton was surprised by the verdict and plans to take it up with the stewards in due course. Asked if he was surprised by the ruling, he said, "Yes, very much so. I was really surprised by it. I think already I was very relaxed about the situation, just saying, look, it's just a racing incident, let's just move on. But considering one car was in control and one car was not in control at the time, obviously, when all the wheels are locked, you're not in control. And if you look at the replay at the end of the whole move, I'm very far from the apex. There's a lot of room on the right-hand side, so I was very surprised. That will be a question when I speak to the stewards at some stage." Hamilton revealed that he has not spoken to Verstappen since the clash, adding that they may cross paths during the pre-race drivers' parade on Sunday at Spa if there is something the Red Bull man want to say. He added, "We didn't talk afterwards. We went to the stewards and that's it, but we've not had a talk. I don't know if we will, if we'll get time. Maybe we'll talk on the drivers' parade this weekend, maybe. I've not felt like there is necessarily a need to. There might be something that he wants to say, but we didn't get the time to do it." The summer period is often punctuated by technical wars between the various teams, not only on the track but also above all off it. And similarly to last season, in fact, in the first months of the season, last season came a clarification from the FIA relating more specifically to the area of connection between the nose and the airfoils to fill what, according to the other teams, could be considered a regulatory hole used by Aston Martin, in which, as well as Aston Martin at the beginning of last season, is the car that has recovered the most ground ever against Red Bull, in what many define almost as a sporting miracle. The introduction of a new front-wing specification on the MCL38 in Austria has allowed a further important step forward for McLaren, which is now finally considered by everyone, including Red Bull, as the first force in this F1. After Red Bull pointed out to the federation that it had noticed some abnormal twists on the front wings of its direct competitors, including McLaren, the control body decided to issue a new technical directive, the TD034G, which will come into force starting from the Belgian Grand Prix. Monitoring the rotation and torsion of the front wing at various speeds, thanks to the now well-known colored viewfinders glued to the side bulkheads, and the installation of cameras that will film in high resolution, 4K, the movement of the wings of some selected teams at each GP. One of the most important problems facing engineers is that the cars of this new generation with ground effect tend to understeer in slow corners and oversteer in fast corners, designing a car that operates efficiently at all speeds. According to some insiders, one way to do this is to think of a flexible front wing that varies its load significantly at various speeds so as to have very steep flaps, more downforce, in the slow, to counteract understeer, but which then lose angle of attack at high speeds so as not to make the car too oversteering. This is seen as a good way to control aerodynamic balance. One of the most important problems facing engineers is that the cars of this new generation with ground effect tend to understeer in slow corners and oversteer in fast corners, designing a car that operates efficiently at all speeds. According to some insiders, one way to do this is to think of a flexible front wing that varies its load significantly at various speeds so as to have very steep flaps, more downforce, in the slow, to counteract understeer, but which then lose angle of attack at high speeds so as not to make the car too oversteering. This is seen as a good way to control aerodynamic balance. Moving on to the actual design. For the engineers, the difficulty lies in being able not to make the various wing macro components yield to the loads imposed by the Federation, instead making them flex on the track as the speed and therefore the aerodynamic load vary. The FIA verifies the legality of the front wing using a static test, where a vertical force of 60 N is applied at various points, with the flaps not having to deform more than 3 millimeters. The technical directive, which will make its debut next weekend, will allow the Federation to assess whether the current static load tests are still sufficient, or whether it will be necessary to introduce other tests or modify the current ones. In several rounds starting from Spa, we want to monitor the front wings of all the teams. The FIA said, the data collected will be used to improve the understanding of the flexibility of the front wings, which will be useful to define future moves. The FOM cameras facing forward are unfortunately not able to capture the entire front wing since the angle does not cover the outside, but above all, the control body of the top series of Motorsport has, however, specified that all front wings are fully legal based on existing load tests. The purpose of the data collection exercise is to see if any teams have figured out how to use secondary parameters, such as temperature or simply downforce, to create additional flexibility. It is clearly understood that after data collection and Friday's free practice, selected teams will be allowed to remove additional cameras. After his late-night sim racing became a topic of intense debate during the Hungarian Grand Prix, Max Verstappen has set the record straight. He has not been banned from sim racing. Speaking to media ahead of the Belgian Grand Prix, Verstappen has flatly denied that he has been banned from sim racing, and he also notes that his free time should not play a factor in his racing performance. Verstappen's love of sim racing is no secret, and during several occasions in F1 2024, it has been public knowledge that he has taken part in 24-hour sim races during Grand Prix weekends. However, that hobby has caused stir during the Hungarian Grand Prix weekend, and was pegged as a possible explanation for the reason that Verstappen both failed to win the race and was particularly snappy on the radio. Speaking to assembled media before the Belgian Grand Prix, Verstappen denied that his late-night sim racing was the issue in Hungary. I raced until 3 a.m., he said. It's not something new, and for me, it's something very important in my life. Now, there are no other sim races coming up anyway, so no one needs to worry about that. He also addressed concerns that it was the sim racing that resulted in a challenging race, but Verstappen flatly denied any suggestion that that could be the case. When you don't win the race, you will always blame it on, you were staying up until 3 a.m., or I was 1 kilo overweight, he said. There are always things to make up that you can argue about when you don't win a race. But for example, in Imola, I did win the race, both of them. For me, this is not something new. I've been doing this since 2015. This is not something that is any different in my preparation. I've won 3 world championships. I think I know pretty well what I can and what I cannot do, and I'm always very hard on myself about what is allowed and what isn't allowed. Earlier this week, rumors circulated that Verstappen had been explicitly banned from sim racing during Grand Prix weekends. However, he denied that Helmut Marko had issued any bans. We talked about it, Verstappen said of Marko. I said, anyway, you don't need to worry. Like I said, there's no other racing coming up. It's not that I have a ban or whatever. Further, Verstappen added, I also don't need to tell them what they do in their private time during the weekends. And that's the same thing. They're strong words from the 3-time champion. Heading into Belgium, Verstappen will have an uphill battle to climb on race day, as reports have emerged that the Red Bull driver may have to take a new power unit. Doing so would give him a 10-place grid penalty ahead of what is expected to be a wet weekend at Spa-Francorchamps. Alpine is set for a 3rd team principal in less than 2 seasons, with Bruno Famin making way for a new name as team boss. The revolution that has started at Alpine will see the Enstone-based squad gain a new team boss in the near future, with Bruno Famin set to make way for a new appointment. Almost exactly a year after Alpine announced the departure of former team boss Otmar Schaffnauer, the Enstone-based squad is set to appoint a new team boss in place of Bruno Famin. Famin was appointed as an interim team boss following Schaffnauer's departure, with Famin serving as vice president of Alpine Motorsport before taking on the role full-time for 2024. However, sources have told PlanetF1.com that Famin is set to move aside within the Renault organization to a different role, with an as-yet unnamed successor to take over following the summer break. An announcement is expected shortly after the Belgian Grand Prix weekend. A name hotly tipped for the position is High-Tech GP founder Oliver Oakes, who has been linked with the role. The 36-year-old currently oversees High-Tech's racing efforts in Formula 2 and Formula 3, and, if appointed, would become the youngest team boss on the grid. The move comes just weeks after Alpine confirmed the appointment of Flavio Briatore, with the former team boss of Renault Benetton joining as an executive advisor to Renault Group CEO Luca De Meo. The English-French squad is currently going through a period of turmoil following recent reports that staff at the engine department at Viry-Châtillon have been informed Alpine will not be using the power units developed at the facility when the regulations change in 2026, with the squad rumored to be swapping to Mercedes power. Sources have indicated that staff at the Viry facility are currently in disastrous psychological states, with the news being broken to them following months of intense work creating a 2026 power unit that is said to be producing results exceeding initial benchmarks. Lando Norris has admitted he was stupid not to let Oscar Piastri pass earlier in the McLaren team orders row at the Hungarian Grand Prix, as it would have allowed him to challenge his teammate for the win. McLaren claimed a rare 1-2 finish in Budapest last weekend, with Piastri leading Norris home to collect his maiden F1 victory. However, the landmark result was overshadowed by a team orders row, triggered by McLaren's decision to pit Norris first during the final round of stops, which saw him leapfrog his teammate. Despite the pleas of his race engineer over team radio, Norris flirted with refusing to return the position to Piastri for several laps before following McLaren's instructions in the closing stages. Norris later insisted that he had always intended to give the lead back to Piastri. Speaking to media ahead of this weekend's Belgian Grand Prix at Spa, Norris revealed that his biggest mistake was not letting Piastri pass him earlier in the proceedings. With the McLaren drivers free to race in Budapest, that would have allowed Norris to challenge his teammate for the win on merit. Asked if he would have done anything differently now, Norris replied, "Just let him pass straight away. It's such a stupid thing that I didn't, because we were free to race. I could have just let him pass and still tried to overtake and to race. It sounds so simple now, but it's not something that went through my head at the time. Such a simple thing like that I could have done. I was just in a good rhythm and things were going well at the time. I questioned it a few times, I questioned the team a few times. I knew from as soon as they boxed me before him that I was going to have to let him go. It was a bit silly to not let him go earlier." Asked how many times he has replayed the race in his head since Sunday, he said, "Once. I don't need to overthink it or overcomplicate it. It was a couple of very simple things. I feel like it's turned into a much bigger deal than it needs to be. It was always clear, I always knew that I had to let him go. But the longer I waited, just because it didn't matter if I let him go straight away or at the end necessarily, the more people questioned whether I would have done it or not. I think that's the main feeling. A lot of people think that I wouldn't have done, but I knew I had to, so it made no difference. But I don't need it replayed. I just know that I should have let him pass earlier. Then I still could have had a chance to try and win the race myself. That's what I should have done. If I thought of that at the time, 100%, I would have done it. I didn't think of that for whatever reason, so I just probably wasn't thinking of the right things at the time. There was no. As soon as they basically said let him pass now, I let him pass straight away. There was never a factor of ignoring, not listening all these types of things. It was always clear what I wanted to do and needed to do, but I just let it go on for a little bit too long." Norris admitted that he was not too proud that his actions had overshadowed both Piastri's first win and only McLaren's second 1-2 result since the 2010 season. He said, "Could it have been handled slightly differently from both a team side and from a personal side? Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I think we wouldn't be having this conversation now in some ways. But if people on the outside want to come up with their own stories of what happened and what I would have done and wouldn't have done, I don't mind about that, but it's the things that I could have done. The fact that I kind of clouded over Oscar's race win, his first race win in Formula One, is something I've not felt too proud about. The fact that we had a 1-2 and that was barely a headline after the race, the fact that we had a 1-2 and nothing was really spoken about it from that side, I felt worse about. But apart from that, we discussed it, we spoke about it. Both sides things could have done things a little bit better and a little bit differently. It's not good that we had it, it's not a good moment that we had it, but we've learned from it and hopefully we'll do better next time. Carlos Sainz has said in no uncertain terms that he will not be taking a sabbatical next season as he continues to nail down his next move in Formula One. With confirmation that Esteban Ocon will join Haas, there are now just 5 seats for Sainz to choose from in 2025, but he appears no closer to choosing one. Sainz has been contemplating his future ever since Lewis Hamilton's move to Ferrari was announced in February but 5 months later, and the Spaniard has still not put pen to paper on a deal. In that time, his options have been falling with half the grid now having both seats filled for 2025. However, the possibility of taking a year out is not one that the 29-year-old has considered. Absolutely no! Sabbatical isn't even in my head, he told media in Thursday's FIA press conference at Spa. I'm happy in Formula One, love Formula One, and I would rather go down to a midfield team and help and use my skill in the peak of my career to try and help the team to find the right way than taking a year off or being third driver for anyone. I'm competitive, and I know I can still bring to a midfield team that side of me. One of the options most linked to Sainz is a move to Sauber ahead of Audi's arrival, and the appointment of Sainz's former boss Mattia Binotto could be seen as another plus point for the current Ferrari driver. On Binotto's arrival and how that may affect his decision, Sainz insisted it had not moved the needle. I think my future is still being discussed and obviously analyzed very carefully, and there's changes to a lot of teams that I'm looking at for next year pretty much every week, he said. So there's changes on the team market as much as there is on the driver market, and I'm just going to keep giving myself time to take the decision to analyze all these things that keep changing without giving you too many clues. As for how Binotto may improve Audi, Sainz said having an experienced member like that would be beneficial for any team. I'm not up to date with everything that is going on at Audi, but of course, I think the arrival of Mattia to any team is positive, mainly because he has the experience of what it takes to build a team. He has that experience from Ferrari that he can bring into Audi, and I'm sure he's a great asset for them, and that's why they hired him. Thanks for watching the video. Now watch this video next on the latest silly season news. I'll see you there.